Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to create a tutorial for editing this wedding photo. This is not my image. This image belongs to one of my wedding photography clients who I'm coaching. And this was her second wedding and first time using an on-camera flash. In the session leading up to the day before this wedding, I actually was able to coach and teach her how to use her flash on her camera, how to go ahead and map out and plan for different spaces in the venue that she was going to be shooting in. When we had our follow-up session, she sent over this raw image, and I was able to walk her through an edit on how to save this image and get a good edit for delivery to her clients. And so I'm going to take you through a walkthrough of that edit as well, and let's go ahead and get started. So the number one thing I want to start with is evening out the exposure across the center and bottom right hand side of this image. All right, so what I'm going to use is my brushes. I'm going to create a mask, and notice I'm going to want my feathering to be 100%. I want my flow and my density to be around 50%. It doesn't have to be exact. Then I'm actually going to zoom out, command hit the minus key, and I'm going to paint in where I want my effect to occur. So only the painted area, you can see the tint is turning a little red. That's where the effect will occur. Now I'm going to lower the exposure in that area to even out where the flash was at. You can see the flash was hot there in the center of the photo and in the far right hand side versus the outside. And we're going to use individual masking brushes for each of these areas. Notice it's still a little hot down here in the corner. The reason I use individual brushes is so that I can have micro control of every area of the photo and make it match. So now our overall exposure is getting more similar across the frame where the flash hit really sharp. I'm going to go over one new brush here, and I'm going to bring this down a little bit more so the whole photo matches. All right, so it's looking darker now, but when we're done, it won't look that way. So now we can up the total exposure of the whole image without it being too dark on the right corner, without it being too bright on the right corner. So now we're having a more even exposure throughout. So I'll go ahead and, this was a finished version right there. And so this is what we're starting with. Let me go photo, create virtual copy, settings, reset all settings, and that was the original. We'll keep bouncing back to that so I can show you what's happening. So we're going to open up a new brush, and now we're going to even out the darker portions of the photo around the back and left. You see my feathering is only touching portions of the photo, and I'm going to actually increase the exposure. And you can see where that's brightening up the darker areas of the image. So we're getting a nice even exposure across where that flash originally hit. All right, so now I am ready to apply my preset, and I'm going to use a personal preset that I have here that I've labeled recipe 5. I know that's the one I want to start with. And you can see different variety of how the photo is handling the blacks and the highlights and the shadows. So we'll start with 5. I know that's a place I like to start just from my personal experience with the colors I like to end with. All right, so nobody in their right mind would say, oh, that's a great photo. It's too dark in the blacks, too much shadow. It's not great. So we're going to start fine-tuning that preset. So I need to bring the shadows up, bring the blacks up. All right, here we go. Let's see. There's the overall exposure. All right, bring the shadows up. All right, so now we're getting some detail in the background, and we're going to start straightening this out. Let me go ahead and click my noise reduction. I usually step between 15 to 20. Constrain crop, so we're not getting any strange outlines. Now, sometimes the auto transform key in Lightroom, it doesn't really read the image very well. Like right there, it's still a little tilted for my liking. So I'm going to actually turn that off, and I'm going to do this manually by shifting the photo at these various axes. And you can use the lines on the floor to help you kind of figure out a correct orientation of the image. And you're shifting the different axes to get a straightened image that you like. Now, I'm also going to do this. Check this out. I don't like all this dead space up here above. This was like an LCD screen behind them with a graphic of some lights. I'm going to trim this photo down to where that is the edge of my frame. There are other Photoshop techniques you could do to extend that, but we're not really going to mess with that today. Let's get our subjects in the center. So now we're going before, after. Now we're not even close to done yet. I'm going to go ahead and even out the skin tones of this image. Everything's a little warm, in my opinion, for my liking. So there are multiple ways that you can do this, and each of them will give you varying degrees of control over what element you're editing in the photo. So if I select this color temperature slider, it's going to affect the color temperature of the entire image. Okay, so we can get a little bit of mileage out of that. So let's cool the photo off just a little bit, very subtle. Now, I still feel like this is a bit bright over here on the right side, so I'm going to go back to my brushes, and I'm going to brush in another adjustment. You can follow here, and you can see where I'm painting over the subject all the way out to this guest in the background and down. Now I'm going to bring the exposure down just a little bit more, even that out. Okay, and I notice his shoulder was not responding to that as well, and so I'm going to take a separate brush and brush in across the arm and shoulder, and then I'm going to bring that exposure down. You'll notice that I'm taking separate brushes to control different areas of the photograph. All right, let's start working on illuminating the groom's face here. Because his face was turned away from the flash, I'm going to paint my setting in here. Remember, my flow and density are turned down to half so that it's not too intense. Then I'm going to increase the exposure in that isolated controlled area only. Then I'm going to click brush, new brush, and I'm going to fix the neck area. So I'm going to brush only into the neck area where that exposure value is so varied right there across the neck. I'm going to bring that up a little bit. Once again, new brush. This gives you complete control over all the separate areas that you're adjusting. If you use one brush to try to make all these various changes, the values of what you're trying to change are not going to be the same. For example, if I tried to illuminate the bride's hair, let me click a new brush. If I want to illuminate the bride's hair, the settings for illuminating her hair are not the same as the other shadow dark values in the image. So if I try to use her settings to fix something else in the photo, it may be too bright or too dark. So I want to click a new brush for every setting. So I'm going to bring some detail out in her hair. You can see that detail coming out in her hair there. All right. One thing I like to do to see the effects that I've added to make sure they're subtle and not too extreme is I'll toggle this switch off and on. There was our start point. There's where we're at so far, and you can see how this is starting to even out. All right, let me zoom in. Now I'm going to continue to do fine adjustments to these shadowed areas here, and I'm going to paint in. I want a little less contrast between the highlights on his face and the neck area here. So I'm actually going to desaturate that to get some of that orange color out of there. And I'm going to bring the exposure up. Now I'm going to go back and add a new brush over the face. And I'm just going to slowly start, as I make each micro adjustment, I get closer and closer to an overall pleasing exposure over the face. So I'm going to bring the saturation down as well. I want to pull some of the orange out of the skin, and I'm going to bring the shadows up and the exposure up. So it's starting to match the overall part of the photo. So next is I'm going to bring his hair out from the background. So I need a new brush. Now, for example, let's say if I take what I did on his neck and I try to apply it to the hair, it's not necessarily going to match. In this case, it doesn't seem to be hurting anything, So that looks like it works okay. Bring some detail out in the hair. All right. I'm going to toggle my switch off and on, and you can see the adjustments that are being made. Let's bring these highlights down, and we'll do a little bit more of this in Photoshop. So I'm going to go over the highlighted areas right there across his cheek. I'm going to bring those down to match. Now let's fix the ear. The ear's appearing a little dark compared to the rest of the side of the head. New brush, paint my mask on, and then make my small adjustment. Cool. All right. Looking pretty sharp here. Let's zoom out, toggle off and on my masks adjustments. And you can see where the light was so hot from the flash here on the right side to now everything is starting to appear more even. To make sure the jacket matches the rest of the overall exposure. So here from the shoulder, I'm gonna make sure that that mask is painted in all the way across the edge, making sure that the shoulder matches. Now I also want to make sure that the skin tone matches, so I'm going to refine that at the local level. So what happens if I just start changing the color values, it changes everything in the image that is on that slider. However, there's this little tool here to the right, and I can click with this little tool and drag down, and it isolates the color even more in a more refined way. And I can click and drag my mouse up and down, and that will change that registered color tone throughout the image. So I'm going to start with the luminance, and I'm going to click on this color tone that I want to refine. You can see bringing it up and down, the luminance. Clicking, hold, pull up. All right. Now the saturation of that as well, I'm going to bring down. So now it pulled some of the kind of yellow-orange tone out of the image. That's fine. We don't want to go too far with that. And then we're going to adjust the hue, which is the hue of the color. More magenta, more green. I kind of like the way it was at that point. I feel like I pulled too much saturation out, so I'm going to add that back. And I would rather fix it by changing the hue than the saturation. So I'm going to pull the hue a little more green. And we can do some more refining in Photoshop. Well, I'm feeling pretty good about this image. You can see the before and the after. I'm going to kind of just fiddle around here for a second, get them centered up in the frame. Some other tools that we can use are the linear gradient. I can pull a linear gradient across the frame in any direction I'd like, and I can continue to minimize the effect of that flash from the side. And the further I drag it out from the center point, the less dramatic the effect is. And rotate it there a little bit. I'm feeling pretty good about this. All right, so that's a decent in Lightroom. I'm going to do any kind of Photoshop, skin touch-ups, repairs. I'm going to do all that in Photoshop. Let's make sure that my noise reduction is turned on. I'm not adding grain here in Lightroom. Got all my lens corrections turned on. And before we leave here, I'm going to show you all the different masks. There's 15 different masks that made little micro changes across the image. And then I can toggle those off and on, and you can see how far we've come. All right, let's go ahead and export this image. I'm actually going to do a couple of more changes and then export another file. I'm going to pull my clarity up, 5 or 6. I don't want that vibrancy too hot because I feel that orange come in. I feel the orange come in back in too much. I'm just fine tuning the color. Another tool that I'm going to use is select subject, and instead of me having to go through and try to mask it out with a brush, the algorithm reads the subjects in the photo and automatically puts a mask over them. In this case, I'm going to increase the sharpness over them. I'm going to probably pull up the shadows just a little bit to separate them from the dark background a little bit more. Boom, there we go. Now they're really popping, giving some dimension to the image. Let's check our edits. Boom. Now we have a nice even photograph, and I'm really happy with that. I'm going to make sure my clarity is over the whole photo. Make sure the sharpness is not too intense. All right, before, I know I keep saying that I'm done. I'm not really done. Let's make a few more edits here. I'm thinking about the hand here, how the hand is so much darker than the rest of the image. So let's go ahead and I'm going to fine tune the hand by painting in a brush. So you can see just all these little brushes all adding together with a lot of control to make sure that you're keeping control over each individual area of the image. See, this part right here was more shadowed than the rest. So I'm going to pull that up a little bit. All right, let's pull this image into Photoshop. Now, I've already exported like 4 different versions of this as I was kind of refining and making sure that I had the final edits that I liked. I kept changing some things. So let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and open Photoshop. All right, so several things are going to happen here. Let me open up my adjustments here. All right, so I'm going to start by removing some of the distracting elements from the image. Got a skin blemish here. I'm going to remove some of these lights from the top that are kind of drawing my eye to the corner. We're going to remove those. There's a little light right above the groom's head that I'm going to get rid of. Cool. And some of these lighter spots in his hair that are a bit too different than the rest of the hair. They are catching my eye, so I'm going to go over those just a little bit. All right, some blemishes here on the neck. You circle those. I'm using the lasso tool, and I'll just click and hold over an area that's discolored. Hold Shift, Delete. It brings up the Content Aware Fill menu, and I can just click Enter with those settings. And so there's different ways there's many different ways to do this stuff in Photoshop. I'm going to remove some of these where the light was bouncing off of his face in different areas that cause tonality in the skin differences. And now I'm going to shift over to the Clone Stamp tool. I have my settings to hardness is turned down to 0, and I'm going to turn my opacity down to anywhere from 20 to 30 when I'm working with skin retouching. And I need my sample size to be, it actually has to vary greatly depending on the areas I'm choosing from. So see, it's dark here, and then we have all this highlighted area, and then it goes back to shadow, dark. I'm going to try to even some of that out so that it's not so abrasive across the face. So I'm going to be pulling from sampled areas and kind of softening that look as it goes across his face. Try to even that out. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with it. You start going too crazy with it, things start looking fake, and people can tell that you were doing stuff. And we want it to be subtle, not abrasive and tacky looking. So right there, we're going to stop about right there. We're going to do a little bit across her neck as well, even out where some of these shadows were causing skin tonality differences. All right, we're about done there. Soften some of this up where that light is changing across the arm. Across the chest. Okay, let's see what else we got here. The hand still has a hot spot right here. Let's fix this hot spot in the hand. I'm going to have to readjust the size and go from here. All right, I see some lint on the jacket. We'll just do this in one. Use the lasso tool, outline what I want to change, Shift, Delete, Enter. All right, let's continue to clean this up. I saw earlier a water bottle here. That blue is kind of distracting. Shift, Delete. Let's get rid of this flower petal here. Stray flower petal. Stray flower petal between the legs right here. Let's get rid of this one. Because they're just kind of protruding, right? They're just kind of distracting to the eye. Those are fine. Little marks here and there. You can see where the light is refracting through that flower vase. Let's get rid of that. You know, and the general viewer is not going to know that any of this took place. They just see a pretty photo. They don't see all these changes that occurred. All right, let me zoom out. All right, pretty cleaned up here. Looking pretty sharp. Let me make sure there's nothing else going on here. This wrinkle in the bust of the dress. Smooth that out. All right, this little white patch here on somebody's clothes. Distracting. These bright spots here kind of distracting. I don't like the way that merged with his head. Let's work on this one alone. Let's see what we can do here. And then I'm going to actually use the clone stamp tool to bring my opacity up. Kind of round out that guy's head from where I made that adjustment. Cool. All right, we're looking pretty good. A few more things I'm going to do. I'm going to add my filter for tilt shift. It's very subtle. I'm not going to leave it horizontal. I'm going to turn it vertical. And it's set to 15. And you see this fall off is kind of pulling some of the distracting elements out of the visual focus. I pull my grain up. It applies a grain from the white bar to the left and from the right bar to the right. I'm going to add that grain and tilt shift effect. You'll see it kind of take place over the image. Now there's this soft fall off, which relatively draws attention and sharpness to the front of the image. I'm going to add my sauce, which adds sharpening, grain. It also adds a hue saturation, desaturation. I actually am going to turn that one off because I need some color in the skin. And you can see it turned that brightness off, adds a little pop of contrast and brightness. All right, well, there we go. It's also got a nice fine grain across it now that kind of seals everything up. And we're ready to export. Now, one thing, I want to check the color tone of the skin here. It's a bit magenta, so I'm going to drag it. A little green. Bring the saturation up. All right, bring the saturation to 5 or 6. Cool. We don't want to suck too much color out of the image. All right, I like that. File, script, image processor, and it's going to put a JPEG file and a Photoshop file right back in the folder that it came from. All right, so let's open this up and see what we've got. Let's go to sample, JPEG. There it is, sample 4. And I'm going to open up Lightroom to show you the original image. And so once you export that and you see it open up on your computer, you can make some final adjustments. Maybe it's too desaturated. Maybe you want to shift the color tones a little bit. That's really up to you at that point. But I want to show you a little before and after. That was the original image in our edit. So let's pull these down close to each other so you see the relative size. Yeah. So there's straight off the camera with the flash and our final edit. And which one would you rather deliver to the client? Hopefully the one to the right. And there's so much you could do with this. We could go back and use brushes to make the warmness of these candles match all the way around the right and the left. It really depends on what time you're going to be able to spend on an image, if it's worth it to you or not. I just wanted to show you what is possible with these raw images, the power you can get out of them, and just to give you confidence in, let's say you get an image like this straight off your camera and you're worried about, oh no, is this ruined? Am I going to be able to save this photo? Do I want to deliver this? And the simple answer is yes. And you can lean this on any spectrum that you want to of your personal preference and your personal editing style. I just wanted to give kind of a general overview for the power of the brushes as you work those individually across the different areas of the face and the body and the shadows of the image, and how much individual control you have to draw out that detail. All right, thank you for watching, and I hope that was helpful.